Chapter 1: How Neuroplasticity Works. The primary objective is to equip you with a robust understanding of the science that underpins long-lasting change. By treating this knowledge as a neuroscientific toolkit, the intention is to move beyond abstract concepts and offer actionable advice that can be implemented immediately to improve one's life. This mission involves taking neuroscience out of the confines of laboratories and academic journals to make it accessible to everyone, based on the belief that understanding these mechanisms is truly life-changing. This journey is about learning to control reactions to whatever life presents, from regulating stress responses to overcoming self-limiting beliefs, ultimately empowering you to create yourself and become whoever you wish to be. At the heart of this transformation lies neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change and adapt in response to the internal and external factors that shape it. Through this process, the connections, functions, and structures of neurons reorganize themselves based on repetitive input. Neurons are the messengers of the brain, responsible for communicating information, and the more a specific message is repeated, the stronger the pathway of communication becomes. One might visualize this process as a small footpath that, through constant use, expands into a dirt road and eventually solidifies into a tarmac highway. This phenomenon is captured by the neuroscientific maxim: neurons that fire together, wire together. Consequently, when thoughts such as "I am not good enough" are continuously repeated, the brain perpetuates and strengthens them until they become deeply ingrained. This narrative often plays in the background like a soundtrack to one's life, leading to automaticity, a state where actions, responses, or behaviors are performed instinctively without conscious decision-making, requiring little cognitive effort or awareness. While neuroscientists long believed that the brain was incapable of change after a certain age, more recent discoveries have proven that the brain retains its plasticity well into adulthood. Although affecting change may require more concerted effort in older years, it is far from impossible. In fact, the molecular structures of the brain suggest it is fundamentally designed to change, which constitutes one of the most significant aspects of human neurobiology. This adaptability allows for learning new things, unlearning unwanted behaviors, and adjusting to new circumstances. On a physical level, the brain literally reorganizes itself to create new synapses, the tiny gaps where neurons exchange information via chemicals called neurotransmitters, or adjusts existing ones. This continuous remodeling capability is central to how we navigate and survive our environments. Emerging research even suggests that neuroplasticity may serve as a therapeutic intervention for conditions like dementia. By ensuring continued engagement with life, both physically and mentally, and by persisting in learning new things, the brain can adapt and maintain its structural integrity. Studies indicate that older adults who remain physically active possess higher levels of specific proteins that keep neuronal connections strong and healthy, correlating with higher cognitive function and reduced neurodegeneration. The brain is essentially a remarkable piece of machinery that can be programmed and upgraded, allowing for a full life governed by autonomy rather than chance. Many remain unaware of this potential power, yet recognizing it is the key to taking control. The ultimate goal is to avoid reaching the age of 80 with regrets about letting life pass by or succumbing to internal criticism, but rather to look back with pride, knowing that life was chosen and crafted, not merely settled for. You are born with a unique genetic makeup, and just as your fingerprint is specific to you, so too is your map of brain connections. You possess a distinct set of identities and traits that may have been buried over time by the brain's programming, influenced by peers and growing circumstances. Recognizing that these unique traits exist beneath layers of conditioned responses is the first step toward retrieving them. By understanding the biological reality of your own potential for change, you begin the process of exhuming these buried traits and reclaiming the path you were meant to travel. Chapter 2. How the Brain Changes. The 3-pound universe sitting in your skull consists of 100 billion neurons with trillions upon trillions of connections that work together to create your own internal world. This internal landscape is profoundly influenced by the outside world, yet it creates an experience that will never be truly known by anyone else. It is somewhat staggering to consider that the only physical barrier separating our private, internal thoughts from the external environment and other people is a mere quarter-inch piece of bone. Within this protected space, the biological machinery of who we are is constantly at work. The neurons in your brain communicate with each other at special junction points called synapses. When neurons communicate with one another repeatedly, they become more efficient at this exchange, and the signals between them grow stronger. This strengthening process explains why you often find yourself going down a very familiar route with your train of thought. It happens almost automatically because the pathway has been well trodden. When we repeat certain things, the message between these neurons is transmitted with increasing ease, and before long, you have reinforced a belief or behavior that seems impossible to shake. The anatomy of this connection, from the dendrites and soma to the axon and the synaptic gap, is designed to solidify these patterns through repetition. However, the mechanism of plasticity is not a one-way street. While we can learn and strengthen pathways, we can also weaken them over time. The brain's ability to adapt means that all the behaviors and patterns you are trying to break can absolutely be dismantled. Just as connections are forged through use, they can be diminished through disuse and conscious redirection. Understanding this reversibility is key to the journey ahead, and throughout the coming chapters, particularly in the first phase of this process, the specific methods for dismantling these ingrained structures will be revealed, turning the science of the brain into a practical roadmap for change. Chapter 3. A note on neurodiversity and critical development. One of the most frequent questions that arises, particularly from the neurodivergent, whether the principles of neuroplasticity apply to those who are autistic or who live with obsessive-compulsive disorder or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. It is crucial to acknowledge that while every single individual, neurodiverse or neurotypical, is completely different, the capacity for change is universal. Neurodivergent individuals often encounter significant challenges in a world that expects them to conform. And the aim here is not to suggest fitting into a neurotypical mold, but rather to highlight that neurodivergent people are fully capable of making new habits and adopting healthier patterns of thinking that serve their own unique needs. While these brains may exhibit differences in structure and function, the fundamental capacity to adapt and create new pathways remains. If you are neurodiverse, it is important to recognize that you have been considered in this journey. The potential to reshape your life is as much yours as anyone else's. To understand how we change, we must look back at how we were formed. As children, we experience developmental plasticity, a state where the brain shapes itself voraciously as a result of environmental interactions. Childhood represents the most critical stage of development, a time when the nuances of life, love, affection, culture, family behavior are ingrained into our brain maps. During these critical periods, a child's brain is rampant with a molecule called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF. This molecule is essential for creating new synapses and promoting the survival of existing ones, functioning as a key component for rewiring the brain. In adulthood, we lose the ability to absorb information passively. A child does not need to be told what is important, as their brain takes in everything. For instance, if a French language recording were played daily in the background of a child's life, they would likely learn to speak the language with little effort. Try this in adulthood, however, and you would learn nothing unless you made a conscious, concerted effort to pay attention to the words. Because of this constant state of suggestibility, childhood experiences heavily shape the brain, creating a set of rules about how one operates in life. While some developmental windows, such as those for vision or hearing, do close, meaning one cannot develop sight later if the brain map was not claimed by vision during the critical period, most of the brain remains plastic. The brain is efficient. If the visual cortex is not used for sight, it becomes available for rent, which is why blind individuals often develop heightened tactile discrimination for tasks like reading Braille. Beyond these extreme sensory examples, the vast majority of our makeup, our habits, behaviors, knowledge, intelligence, and creativity remains open to change. When people reflect on what holds them back, they often list a wide range of habits and behaviors: poor sleep hygiene, excessive social media usage, procrastination, perfectionism, negative self-talk, people-pleasing, or a lingering sense of insecurity. The good news is that none of these traits are hardwired aspects of the self. They are plastic modalities that can be dismantled and reconstructed. We are not born with low self-esteem, ruminating thoughts, or a tendency to interrupt ourselves while working. Rather, as we grow, we learn to attach meaning to things. A 5-year-old may see a mother's gold wedding ring merely as something shiny and valuable, but it is only years later, perhaps when the ring is permanently removed, that the child understands the nuanced symbolism of separation or loss. We learn these basic behaviors on an unspoken level, often through body language so subtle it is hard to describe. This is why we sometimes meet strangers who remind us of someone else simply by the way they move their hands or curl their lips. This phenomenon is known as observational knowledge. In the Venezuelan tribe of Yecuana, for example, mothers carry their newborns for months, allowing babies to learn through physical connection. When a mother reaches for a hot pot, she twists her body away from the heat. The child learns the stove is dangerous without ever being told, encoding this understanding directly into their brain. This mechanism works the same way for our emotional behaviors. We observe how our parents and peers react to the world, and we mimic them, shaping who we become. If a parent is insecure about their body, a child often gains observational knowledge that dictates they should feel the same way about their own appearance. Similarly, if one grows up surrounded by peers who lose their cool in stressful situations, one might learn to cry or lash out when angry, simply because no alternative model was presented. Observational knowledge is wonderful for survival, teaching us what burns us without us having to feel the fire. But it is also how we pick up unhealthy patterns. We are told what is right and wrong, and we follow it because we know no difference. It is a strange sentiment to consider that, as adults, we possess the ability to mold and shape a child into who they will become, often without even realizing we are doing it. Chapter 4: Mental Heuristics and the Path to Change. Just as we unconsciously mimic the physical mannerisms of our parents, we also absorb the minor remarks and labels that can stick with us for a lifetime. These subtle messages, often delivered without malicious intent, act as a subconscious programming that shapes our self-perception. A teacher might casually mention that a student will never be good at a particular subject, or a parent might label one child as the sporty one and another as the creative one, inadvertently signaling that the latter could never run a business. We see this in women who become housewives because they were told they weren't suited for study, or in men who suppress their emotions or avoid creative pursuits because they were taught such things were incompatible with masculinity. This programming feeds into a downstream cascade of issues driven by deep-rooted beliefs, often manifesting as ruminating thoughts, repetitive, intrusive patterns of dwelling on past events, worries, or self-criticism. We are not born with low self-esteem. No child comes into the world hesitating to say, "Look at me." These are learned behaviors that intensify stress, disrupt sleep, and hinder our ability to solve problems, yet they often feel impossible to turn off because they have become our default setting. While the brain's plasticity makes it possible to overwrite these patterns, doing so in adulthood requires significantly more attention and intention than in childhood. By the time we reach adulthood, we operate primarily on mental heuristics or mental shortcuts. The brain is designed to save energy for cognitively demanding tasks, so it automates routine actions. You likely do not pay attention to which hand you use to brush your teeth, open a door, or turn on a light. If you were asked to switch hands, you would find it difficult and likely revert to your old habit by the next day, simply because the brain prefers the path of least resistance. This reliance on energy-saving shortcuts explains why breaking a habit feels like swimming upstream. It is the reason a flatmate might repeatedly leave the kitchen door open despite being asked not to. They are not trying to be annoying, but are simply operating through their own mental heuristics, unaware that they have slipped back into automaticity. The power of these ingrained pathways is beautifully and poignantly illustrated by the story of Gene McAhee, an elderly man with dementia whose memory reset every 15 minutes. Despite his condition, a viral video showed him emerging from his house every day at the same time with his chair, though he never consciously understood why. He was there to greet a school bus of children who had been stopping for 3 years to shower him with love and appreciation. Every day he met them as if for the first time, and every day he smiled. Deep down, his subconscious brain held a pattern of behavior that drove him to step outside, proving that we do not always need conscious awareness to perform specific actions. Our lives are largely governed by these automatic rhythms. To disrupt these rhythms and learn something new, we must harness a system in the brain known as the reticular activating system, or RAS. This system acts as a filter for the billions of pieces of sensory information flooding our minds at any given moment. Sights, sounds, textures, and smells. If you sit in a coffee shop with a friend, your RAS allows you to focus on their voice and face while filtering out the clatter of cups, background conversations, and peripheral movement. The brain essentially blinds itself to the irrelevant to preserve focus. However, if you consciously chose to, you could shift your attention to the conversation at the next table or the dog barking outside, tuning into frequencies you previously ignored. Adult plasticity works on this same principle of selective attention. You cannot simply play a language tape in the background and expect to learn French as a child might. You must consciously engage with the material. Similarly, changing a habit requires you to pay attention to the behavior regularly and repeat the new alternative until it becomes the new automatic. Research suggests it takes anywhere from 18 to 254 days to form a new habit, with an average of around 66 days for a behavior to become automatic. This timeline might seem daunting, but it explains why fleeting attempts at change often fail within a week. The brain simply reverts to its efficient, established heuristics. Realizing this can be a pivotal moment. A friend once pointed out that I complained constantly, a revelation that shocked me because the behavior was so deeply ingrained I hadn't noticed it. It was simply my automatic way of operating. However, that shock forced my reticular activating system to pay attention to every instance of complaining, which allowed me to do the work necessary to change it. Acknowledgement is the first step. You cannot grow a plant without planting a seed, and acknowledging the problem is that seed. This understanding forms the foundation of the journey ahead, which is structured into 3 distinct phases designed to break the cycle and alter your thoughts. The first phase, ditch the negative, focuses on letting go of what holds you back, exploring stress regulation, and understanding the brain's tendency to focus on the negative. The second phase, shift your narrative, involves the deep work of rewiring the subconscious through 7 specific steps. Finally, the third phase, boost the positive, offers strategies to support this new hardware for long-lasting well-being. This book is an interactive toolkit blending evidence-based science with real-life examples to show that change is not only possible, but achievable. As you embark on this process, remember the sentiment that you are the most wonderful project you will ever work on. Chapter 5. Break the cycle. When we find ourselves stuck in a rut, seeing a way out can feel nearly impossible. Even when the answers are theoretically within reach, the belief that change is possible often remains elusive. This stagnation is rarely a flaw of character, but rather a result of neurobiology, specifically the state of one's nervous system, which drives mood, unsolicited emotions, and the persistent hum of worry. To break this cycle, we must first confront the mechanism that most often keeps the wheel turning: stress. While the term often evokes images of tension and anxiety, treating all stress as detrimental is a misunderstanding of our biology. Stress is, in fact, a fundamental requirement for life. It exists in three primary forms: alert stress, acute stress, and maladaptive stress. Alert stress provides the necessary focus to perform daily tasks, from walking the dog to meeting work deadlines, utilizing hormones like adrenaline to sharpen our reactions. Acute stress is similarly adaptive. It acts as a short-term burst of energy designed to aid problem solving. A student facing an exam, for instance, utilizes this surge to prioritize tasks and heighten focus. Once the event passes, the body rebounds, resilience is built, and growth occurs. However, when stress demands exceed our ability to cope, or when acute stress fails to subside, it mutates into maladaptive stress. This is the dark side of the mechanism, a state of chronic physical and emotional exhaustion where the brain switches into a low-power mode. Much like a phone preserving its last bit of battery, a brain in this state conserves energy by reverting to mental heuristics and ingrained habits, making it neurologically difficult to choose new, healthier behaviors. In this state, the brain's hardware is compromised. The amygdala, the threat detection center, becomes enlarged and hyperactive, while the hippocampus, crucial for memory and stress regulation, and the frontal cortex, responsible for logic and impulse control, suffer structural impairments. This explains why, when overwhelmed, we might find ourselves crying over a snagged sweater or snapping at a loved one. The logical brain has been hijacked by a survival mechanism that perceives threats everywhere. I know this state intimately, having spent much of my 20s in a chronic state of emotional dysregulation, a period I refer to as my stressy messy phase. During this time, my inability to manage my own physiology led to darker places, fueled by poor lifestyle choices and a lack of self-esteem. A vivid example of this occurred in the Italian Alps, where I experienced a massive meltdown outside a car rental agency simply because I lacked the credit card required for the deposit. Because my system was already in a state of hypervigilance, this minor inconvenience triggered a disproportionate reaction, resulting in me emptying my bag onto the street in a panic. 10 minutes later, after a simple solution was found, I was laughing hysterically, a testament to the turbulence of a nervous system that had lost its baseline. I did not know then that I was fighting my own biology, trying to upgrade my software while the hardware was crashing. To reclaim control, we must learn to speak the language of the brain. Since the brain is primitive and prioritizes survival over logic, we cannot simply think our way out of a stress response. We must use the body to signal safety. One of the most effective tools for this is the physiological sigh, a breathing pattern consisting of 2 short inhales followed by a long, slow exhale. This technique, highlighted by neurobiology, works by reinflating the tiny air sacs in the lungs called alveoli, which collapse during stress, and offloading the buildup of carbon dioxide that triggers agitation. By mechanically ventilating the lungs and extending the exhale, we flip the switch from the sympathetic fight-or-flight system to the parasympathetic rest and digest system, handing control back to the logical mind. Beyond immediate regulation, we must also examine how we decompress. Engaging in hobbies is not merely a leisure activity, but a neurochemical necessity. When we immerse ourselves in activities we love, be it dancing, painting, or singing, we stimulate the release of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, a molecule that supports the survival of neurons and promotes plasticity. This allows us to leave the stress of the day at the door. Without such outlets, we risk carrying the day's cortisol home with us, maintaining a state of high alert that prevents the parasympathetic rebound necessary for recovery. This lingering stress is what leads to allostatic load, the cumulative wear and tear on the body that keeps us locked in survival mode. It is also vital to distinguish between stress, worry, and anxiety, as they require different interventions. Stress is a physiological response to an external threat. Worry is a cognitive process, the frontal lobes trying to solve potential future problems. Anxiety, however, is a loop triggered by the limbic system, often characterized by fear of the unknown or the future, and can exist without an external trigger. Anxiety can become a habit loop where the brain seeks control through repetitive, often unhelpful behaviors. To break this loop, we can leverage the mechanism of optic flow. Walking forward through an environment generates lateral eye movement, known as optokinetic nystagmus. This side-to-side motion creates a quietening effect on the amygdala, reducing fear and anxiety. This is why a walk in nature often clears the head. The combination of forward movement and the panoramic view signals to the deep brain that we are safe and moving away from danger. Furthermore, we must understand the dynamic nature of our emotions and neurochemistry. Following a major achievement, such as a career milestone or a personal triumph, it is biologically normal to experience a dip in mood. This is not necessarily depression or ingratitude, but homeostasis, the body regulating itself after a surge of dopamine and adrenaline. Even elite athletes experience post-Olympic depression for this reason. Recognizing that these fluctuations are temporary chemical tides rather than permanent personality flaws allows us to ride the wave without judgment. By naming our emotions, literally identifying anger, fear, or sadness, we can engage the prefrontal cortex, dampening the limbic system's intensity and regaining a sense of agency. Finally, we must protect our mental currency. Our brain energy is finite, and in the modern world, we often squander it without realizing. Many of us believe that scrolling through social media during a lunch break constitutes a rest, but scientifically, this is a fallacy. Processing the endless stream of data from a phone screen is cognitively expensive and contributes to vigilance decrement or a loss of attention. True recovery requires a strategic break, 10 to 15 minutes of minimal sensory input, perhaps with eyes closed or staring into the distance. This allows the brain to replenish its energy resources rather than depleting them further for a cheap dopamine hit. By managing our stress, differentiating it from anxiety, and spending our mental energy wisely, we stop conspiring against ourselves and begin to build a foundation where the brain's hardware is healthy enough to support the new software of the person we wish to become. Chapter 6: Negativity Bias. Neuroscience reveals that negative emotions elicit a much larger response in the brain than positive ones, a phenomenon likely rooted in our evolutionary need to survive. This means we are biologically predisposed to pay more attention to bad things and overlook the good. When I asked my followers about the negative assumptions they make about themselves, the responses were heartbreakingly familiar. People convinced they will fail before they begin, believing they are unworthy of love, or certain that a canceled plan means they are disliked. These biases manifest not only as internal stories, but also as behaviors. We all know the flatmate or colleague who returns home to recount the day's misfortunes in a melodramatic tone, spiraling from a late train to a rude comment until the entire day is painted black. To counteract this, I often plant a seed in social settings, asking friends or clients to identify their small wins and big wins of the week. Initially, the response is almost always a dismissal, a claim that nothing good happened, followed by a recitation of gloom. However, as we dig deeper, they begin to realize that the wins were there all along, simply overshadowed by the brain's default filter. By the end of the conversation, their demeanor shifts, proving that while we cannot ignore the negative, we can choose to shine a brighter light on the positive. People rarely forget how you make them feel, and by highlighting these wins, we help guarantee a life of happier memories for ourselves and those around us. This tendency to jump to negative conclusions is known as negativity bias, and it is deeply embedded in our emotional architecture. If we look at the basic human emotions, only two, joy and trust, are explicitly positive, while the majority, such as anger, disgust, sadness, and fear, are negative. This imbalance explains why a single negative comment on a social media post can ruin a day otherwise filled with praise. Scientific studies on event-related potentials confirm this. When participants are shown a mix of images, the negative ones trigger a significantly greater magnitude of brain response than the positive ones. Negative stimuli simply carry more informational value for the brain, demanding more attention and cognitive processing, which in turn heavily influences our judgment and decision making. The most detrimental aspect of this bias is the narrative we construct about ourselves, whether born from the criticism of a parent, the dynamics of our peer groups, or societal pressures. These repetitive stories solidify into self-limiting beliefs. However, the principles of neuroplasticity offer a way out through two key mechanisms: unbecoming and becoming. The concept of unbecoming relates to the weakening of synapses, summarized by the phrase, neurons that fail to sync, fail to link. By consciously inhibiting a thought and delaying the automatic reaction, we can weaken the neural connection between a trigger and a negative response. Conversely, becoming is based on long-term potentiation, or the strengthening of connections, neurons that fire together, wire together. The more we repeat a thought or action, the more efficient the brain becomes at triggering it. I experienced the power of this automaticity recently while making coffee. My partner bought a new frother that requires a specific method, using only a small amount of water. I knew this, consciously intending to do it right, yet found myself filling the cup to the brim with boiling water, just as I had done for the past 12 years. This mistake was a product of the first law of neuroplasticity. Repeated activation increases the efficiency of communication between neurons. My brain had a 12-year head start on the old method, making it the path of least resistance. This same mechanism applies to our negative self-talk. If you have spent years telling yourself you are not good enough, that connection is highly strengthened and happens without conscious thought. It is not a character flaw. It is simply how the machinery is currently wired. Understanding this helps explain why beating ourselves up is rarely an effective strategy for change. As humans, we are surprisingly adept at ignoring bad news unless it presents an immediate, devastating threat. Studies on behavioral change show that negative warnings, like telling a smoker that cigarettes kill, often fail to motivate. Similarly, during the stock market crash of 2008, research showed that people stopped checking their accounts as values plummeted, preferring to bury their heads in the sand rather than face the negative reality. We do not change because we are shamed or frightened into it. We change when we are motivated by positive outcomes. Therefore, dwelling on the negative only strengthens the neural pathways for worry, keeping us stuck in the cycle we are trying to break. To shift this dynamic, we must actively reframe our thoughts and practice gratitude. Reframing involves catching the automatic negative thought, such as "I am not good enough," and consciously replacing it with "I can adapt and learn." This requires us to first self-regulate, perhaps using the physiological sigh to exit a high-stress state, and then apply the new narrative. Over time, this weakens the old connection and builds a new one. Simultaneously, gratitude acts as a powerful tool for rewiring. It is not merely a passive feeling, but a skill that involves the interplay of neurotransmitters responsible for well-being. By maintaining a consistent practice, whether through a journal, expressing appreciation to others, or discussing small wins at the dinner table, we create a positive feedback loop. The more we practice gratitude, the more the brain wires itself to default to a positive perspective, eventually making the recognition of the good in our lives a natural, habitual response. Through this deliberate attention, we begin to reshape our perception, proving that while the brain is programmed to focus on the negative, it possesses the profound ability to change. Chapter 7. You are standing in your kitchen and you reach into the fridge to grab a handful of lemons. They are cold, their skins bright yellow and waxy against your palm. You place one on a cutting board and slice into it, watching the juice spill out. You pick up a slice, squeeze it to release that burst of zesty fragrance, and then, compelled by the sensory sharpness, you take a big bite, your teeth sinking into the flesh as the sour juice runs down your chin. If you found yourself salivating just now, you have successfully evoked a physiological response solely through the power of your mind. The lemon was not real, but the body reacted as if it were. This simple exercise underscores a profound truth. We can alter our physiological state based entirely on what we are thinking. Consequently, if you are perpetually running a negative narrative about yourself, You are physically reinforcing those neural pathways and solidifying those beliefs in your brain. When I speak at corporate events, the audience often gasps when they realize the weight of their internal dialogue. Most of us move through life with a background voice constantly narrating a story about who we are. While these stories can be positive, they are frequently self-limiting. Take Josh, a client of mine, who habitually jokes that he is a loser because he earns less money than his wife, predicting she will eventually leave him. While he frames this as humor, he is reinforcing an internal belief that manifests as shame and inaction. Our words shape our thoughts shape our feelings determine our actions, and our actions solidify our beliefs. It is a downstream cascade where a seemingly minute comment trickles down to the core of our being, shifting neurochemicals and influencing our emotions. Josh's jokes keep him trapped in a box of his own making, because to the brain, remaining in a familiar state, even a painful one, feels safer than the unknown territory of change. Understanding where these thoughts come from requires looking at the brain's architecture, specifically the default mode network, DMN. As the name suggests, this is the brain's default setting, responsible for mind-wandering, creativity, and self-referential thinking. It relies on data from the past, present, and predicted future to generate an internal dialogue that runs in the background. However, the DMN is also the seat of rumination. Studies show that this network is often hyperactive in individuals who fixate on negative self-referential information, creating a cycle of anxiety and depressive symptoms that feels impossible to break. Working in tandem with the DMN is the Central Executive Network, CEN, the CEO of the brain, which oversees external focus, decision-making, and problem-solving. These two networks operate like a seesaw. When one is up, the other is down. This explains why many people who struggle with negative self-talk become workaholics or obsessively keep themselves busy. They are unconsciously trying to engage the CEN to suppress the DMN and escape their own minds. Between these two stands the salience network, SEN, which acts as a switch, directing attention to whatever is deemed most important in the internal or external environment. Ideally, the SN helps us transition smoothly, alerting us to a loud noise or a friend's voice. However, when dysregulated, the SN can attach undue importance to ruminative thoughts, locking us into a negative feedback loop. The solution lies in metacognition, the ability to recognize, understand, and regulate our thinking patterns. By becoming aware of negative thoughts and reframing them, we can begin to dismantle these automatic firing patterns. Meditation and spending time in nature are powerful tools here, as both have been shown to deactivate the DMN, effectively rebooting the brain's default mode from a state of chaos to one of peace. Furthermore, we can harness the difference between thinking and generating words. Thoughts within the DMN are often nonsensical, unstructured, and emotionally charged. However, the act of speaking or journaling forces these thoughts into a coherent structure, engaging the frontal cortex, the logical, reasonable part of the brain, rather than the emotional limbic system. By writing down our narratives or talking them out, we strip them of their emotional load and render them less vivid and anxiety-provoking. We essentially rewrite the story, moving from "I am not good enough" to "I can adapt and learn." This is not just poetic optimism, it is a neurological necessity. The stories we tell ourselves shape how we carry ourselves, how we interact with the world, and ultimately how the world treats us. The physical impact of our mental narratives is supported by compelling research. In the famous piano experiment conducted by Dr. Alvaro Pascual Leone, participants who merely imagined practicing a 5-finger piano piece showed similar brain plasticity changes to those who physically practiced the keys. Through thought alone, they created new neural pathways. Similarly, Dr. Ali Akram's milkshake experiment demonstrated that our beliefs can alter our hormones. Participants who believed they were drinking a 620-calorie indulgent shake saw their ghrelin, hunger hormone, levels drop significantly, signaling satiety. Those who drank the exact same shake but were told it was a 140-calorie sensible drink maintained high ghrelin levels, leaving them feeling hungry. The calories were identical, but the physiological response was dictated entirely by belief. Even our sensory perception is malleable. Hypnosis studies have shown that altering a person's belief about the size of their hand changes their tactile sensitivity. These findings empower us to see that we are not at the mercy of our programming. The negative narratives we have repeated for years may be deeply ingrained, but they are not permanent. Just as believing in the indulgent milkshake changed the body's chemistry, choosing to believe a new, empowering narrative can physically and neurologically reshape our reality. We are capable of weakening the old pathways of self-doubt and strengthening new ones of self-worth. However, this process requires vigilance, for the most dangerous changes are often the ones we barely notice, the slow, subtle shifts that occur when we stop paying attention. Chapter 8: Creeping Normality. There is a subtle, insidious form of negative change that often goes unaddressed because it occurs so slowly that it slips by unnoticed. This phenomenon is known as creeping normality, or death by a thousand cuts. It is crucial to validate the experiences of those who might look back on their lives and say, "My childhood wasn't that bad," or "I shouldn't feel this way," yet who grew up in environments where their feelings were consistently invalidated, where parents fought constantly, or where they felt rejected by the very people meant to protect them. These experiences are microtraumas, minor incidents that seem insignificant in the moment and are therefore ignored, yet which accumulate over time to leave a long-lasting impact on self-worth and anxiety levels. While we typically associate trauma with singular, terrible events or acts of violence that change us forever, psychological trauma can also be the result of small, seemingly harmless events repeated ad infinitum. This repetition creates a cumulative effect on psychological well-being, shaping our way of thinking and leaving us vulnerable to mental illness and unhealthy coping mechanisms. You do not necessarily have to come from a broken home to experience this. Sometimes it is the quiet rejection of an absent parent, the tension of arguments that never quite turn into shouting, or the crushing feeling of inadequacy born from comparison. Consider the story of Samantha, a friend who grew up in a stable, working-class family with parents who loved each other dearly. They were happy, managed their money well, and took annual holidays. However, Samantha had a sister, Martha, who excelled academically. The parents, perhaps without malice, placed their daughters into rigid boxes. Martha was the smart one, and Samantha, who was athletic, was the dancer. Although Samantha harbored dreams of going to university to study architecture, she felt an immense, unspoken pressure to become a professional dancer because that was the identity her family had constructed for her. Her parents were not bad people. They simply wanted a ballerina so badly that they failed to consider whether their daughter was happy. They invalidated her attempts to speak up, and consequently, Samantha shaped her life around the belief that she wasn't smart enough for academia and that her only value lay in her athleticism. This took a massive toll on her confidence and autonomy, forcing her down a path she did not choose and keeping her stuck in a life she did not want. I have seen this pattern manifest in clients as well. One client, a housewife and mother who loved her life, carried a deep-seated terror of education because her mother had repeatedly told her she wasn't very smart. She was frightened to take a group coaching course, fearing exams or the humiliation of others doing better than her, even though the program had no grades. Her life had stayed on the course her mother had set for her, driven by a subconscious belief that limited her potential. It forces us to ask, how many times have we gone down a particular route simply because of a subconscious belief we accepted as truth? This dynamic also appears in the consistent emotional abuse found in toxic relationships. It often flies under the radar because it is not physically abusive. Instead, it consists of mean comments about appearance, invalidation of feelings, or being told one is overreacting. This behavior slowly compromises confidence and the capacity for trust. It seeps into the veins like a toxic drip, and because the actions never quite reach a threshold that flags them as immediately dangerous, one begins to wonder if they are the problem. Over time, creeping normality sets in, and this toxic environment is accepted as the new normal. If this resonates, you may have constructed a narrative about yourself that you are shy, lazy, unworthy of love, or not good enough, based on lies, abuse, and shame from your past. These stories were pre-programmed by others, but they are not the real you. Fortunately, biology offers a glimmer of hope. Deep within the fold of the cerebral cortex, between the temporal and frontal lobes, lies a pea-sized structure called the insula. This tiny area is responsible for conscious desire. It triggers the cascade of emotions that can either leave you heartbroken or propel you to get up and change your life. Whether triggered by a song, a movie, or random chance, this desire is the spark required to rewire the narrative. To begin this rewiring, we must reassess the narratives we have perpetuated by reconnecting with our core values, qualities like bravery, integrity, curiosity, and optimism. When asked to define their ideal person, to list that person's values and traits, most people eventually come to a startling realization. The person they are describing is actually a version of themselves. It is a moment where something clicks, revealing that they are more aligned with their own values than they thought, but have been buried under a lifetime of pre-programmed beliefs. The truth is, it has always been you. You are your own ideal person, waiting to break free from the walls you built based on what others said. By forgetting the lies and reconnecting with who you truly are, you can create yourself anew. However, as we embark on this journey of redefining our truth, we must be vigilant against the brain's natural defense mechanisms. The brain prefers consistency and has a strong desire to be correct, often leading it to filter reality to match existing beliefs. This tendency, known as confirmation bias, ensures that if you tell yourself you are having a bad day, your brain will dutifully find every reason to prove you right. Chapter 9. You'll see it when you believe it. Consider a scenario where two friends, Caroline and Lucia, are at a bar. Caroline nudges Lucia, whispering for her to check out a man across the room without being obvious. Lucia, naturally, looks over in a not-so-inconspicuous manner, and the man catches her eye. The girls immediately turn back to each other, giggling in that shared conspiratorial way friends do when they spot someone attractive. But across the room, Tom, the man in question, has a completely different internal experience. He immediately shrinks, wondering if there is something on his face or if his shirt is stained. He is certain he is being picked apart rather than admired. To him, it is unfathomable that they could be checking him out. This divergence in reality happens because Tom sees the world not as it is, but as he believes it to be. His internal belief system drives his perception, turning a moment of potential connection into one of judgment. We all know this feeling. It is the sensation of walking into a room and being convinced everyone is judging you, or leaving a conversation with coworkers certain that you said something foolish and that they dislike you. Conversely, there are moments when we snap out of these trances, the aha moments where we realize we have been dating the wrong people despite friends' warnings, or spiraling over a partner's bad mood that had nothing to do with us. The human brain is wonderful in its ability to keep us in Delulu land until we finally see something new, but once we see it, we cannot unsee it. To understand why we get stuck in these loops, we must look at how the brain processes reality through stored templates. Our brains function as efficient archivists, storing templates of previous experiences, memories, and scenarios. As we go about our daily lives, the brain constantly checks new experiences against these stored templates to decide what is worthy of conscious attention. This process is governed by the salience network, SN. If an event matches a pre-existing pattern of automaticity, the brain ignores it to save energy. Think of it like a daily commute. When walking to work, you rarely pay attention to every tree, bend, or passing car because your brain has already mapped this environment as standard. You are on autopilot, and no new memories are encoded. However, if a large beach ball were to roll down the center of a busy road, your brain would immediately snap to attention. The image does not fit the template, the SN activates, and neurochemicals like noradrenaline and acetylcholine surge to help you process this anomaly. The problem arises when these efficient templates are built on negative biases. If you hold a template that says, "I am unlovable," or "people always leave me," your brain will scan your environment for evidence that matches this pattern, filtering out anything to the contrary. This is where the reticular activating system, RAS, comes into play. As discussed previously regarding the coffee shop scenario, the RAS acts as a spotlight, deciding what is relevant. It explains why, the moment you decide to buy a royal blue BMW, you suddenly see them everywhere. The cars were always there, but your brain had previously filtered them out as irrelevant. Similarly, a parent might sleep through a plane taking off, but wake instantly at the sound of their baby shuffling. The RAS learns through experience what is important. I once stayed with my sister in her London flat, which had a smoke detector that beeped twice every 5 minutes. When I complained about the noise preventing my sleep, she was genuinely confused. Her brain had heard that beep for so long that it had learned to filter it out entirely. She lived in her own bubble of silence regarding that sound. In the same way, we can live in a bubble regarding our relationships and self-worth. If we believe a partner is unfaithful, we will view their every action through that lens. If we believe we are having a bad day, the brain will dutifully find reasons to prove us right, turning a stray comment or a spilled coffee into irrefutable evidence of a doomed day. This phenomenon is known as confirmation bias, the tendency to interpret, search for, and recall information that confirms our prior beliefs. A striking example of this comes from a study in the 80s regarding body image. Participants were asked to attend a job interview with facial scars applied by a makeup artist. Unbeknownst to them, the researchers removed the scars just before they entered the room. Despite looking perfectly normal, the participants reported feeling powerless and distressed, claiming the interviewers were rude and stared at their scars. Their belief in the flaw was so strong that they projected judgment onto the interviewers that simply did not exist. They saw what they believed. This internal mechanism feeds into the cognitive triangle, a concept from cognitive behavioral therapy that illustrates the interplay between thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. If you believe you are not good enough for a presentation, you will feel anxious. That anxiety will manifest in your body language, hunched shoulders, poor eye contact, which results in a weak performance. Your peers observe this lack of confidence, which validates your initial thought that you weren't good enough. The cycle reinforces itself, and the neural pathways associated with "I am a failure" become stronger. However, the laws of neuroplasticity dictate that these pathways are not set in stone. We can interrupt the cycle. Just as we can learn to see the beach ball on the road, we can train the brain to look for proof that the world is conspiring with us, not against us. By changing the narrative and consciously looking for evidence of our worth, we retask the reticular activating system to filter for positivity. It is time to realize that the world is not against you. You and your brain have been conspiring against you by telling lies and seeking proof to support them. Until, as Carl Jung famously said, you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. By taking control of the steering wheel and challenging these old memory templates, we can begin to see a reality that reflects the life we truly desire. Chapter 10: Endings, Loss, and Grief. Have you ever felt a pain so acute that you were convinced you were dying? A physical ache in the chest so profound that survival seemed uncertain? This phenomenon is known as broken heart syndrome, a temporary condition with symptoms that mimic a heart attack, brought on by sudden, extreme stress. I remember this feeling vividly, curled up on the floor of the biomedicine lab at my university, terrified that my life was ending. My heart rate, usually a calm 55 beats per minute, was racing at 110, leading a lab partner to joke that I was about to spontaneously combust. A PhD student specializing in stress in the heart assured me I wasn't dying. But in that moment, the biological reality of my grief was undeniable. I was 26, physically fit, but emotionally shattered. I had just moved to a new city to study neuroscience, returning to full-time education after an 8-year hiatus, only to be dumped by my boyfriend 2 days after arriving. The relationship had been toxic, and the breakup was traumatic, leaving me in a state of physical anguish. I wasn't just mourning the loss of a person. I was mourning the loss of the life I had constructed in my mind, my friends back in London, my dreams, and the future we were supposed to share. My heart had temporarily given up under the weight of the stress. Grief is not limited to the death of a loved one. It encompasses all forms of endings and loss. It is the pain of falling out with a best friend, the sting of a rejection letter, or the realization that a long-held dream will never come to fruition. I spent years grieving the fact that I never got into medical school, a promise I had made to my father before he died. After 11 rejections, I realized that I may have been more attached to the narrative of being a doctor than the profession itself. Yet the loss of that trajectory was still a heavy blow. Whether it is a lost job, a failed relationship, or an athlete losing a major final, we all experience hell in different forms. Grief is also the mourning of the future you thought you would have. From a neuroplastic perspective, losing someone forces the brain to readjust to a completely new way of living. Over time, the people we love become ingrained in our neural networks. When they are gone, the brain continues to fire in the old patterns, reaching for the phone to share news, expecting to see them at breakfast, only to be met with a void. This mismatch between expectation and reality is taxing. The pain is not merely metaphorical. Studies show that the brain processes social loss in the same regions responsible for physical pain. The periaqueductal gray becomes active, releasing norepinephrine to dampen the signals, which ironically increases alertness and contributes to the insomnia and exhaustion that often accompany grief. Simultaneously, the posterior cingulate cortex, responsible for autobiographical memories, lights up. This explains why we replay events like a movie reel, obsessing over small details and wondering what we could have done differently. While this rumination can be agonizing, it is also part of the brain's attempt to process the change. The anterior cingulate, our error detection center, goes into overdrive, trying to solve the problem of the ending. This can lead to reframing behavior, a form of experience-dependent plasticity where we learn from the past to protect our future. However, if the amygdala becomes hyperactive, it can flood the body with stress hormones, overriding logical thought and keeping us in a state of survival characterized by fear, sleep disturbances, and emotional volatility. The neurochemistry of loss is equally turbulent. When an ending occurs, the brain's supply of feel-good neurotransmitters, dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, and endorphins plummets. This drop in dopamine can cause anhedonia, the inability to feel pleasure, and can drive impulsive behaviors as the brain desperately seeks a reward. This is why you might feel the urge to stalk an ex on social media or engage in retail therapy. The brain is going through withdrawal and looking for a fix. This activity in the nucleus accumbens mirrors addiction, making the urge to contact a lost partner feel overpowering. However, engaging in these impulses often prolongs the pain. Instead, we must find healthy ways to replenish these chemicals, such as exercise, which releases dopamine and serves as an adaptive coping mechanism. Serotonin levels also take a hit, leading to mood swings and obsessive thinking. To support regulation, we can turn to sunlight, nature, and foods high in tryptophan, the building block of serotonin. Meanwhile, oxytocin, the bonding hormone, becomes a double-edged sword. While it creates the warm feelings of connection, it also acts as a crisis hormone during relationship distress, intensifying the desire to bond with the very person who is gone. Healing requires time for these bonds to loosen and for the brain to rewire itself around a new reality. Finally, endorphins, the body's natural painkillers, can be coaxed back through laughter, crying, singing, or social connection, helping to lift the veil of misery. One of the most powerful ways to navigate this neurobiological storm is through emotional expression. Art and creativity allow us to take the ruminating, dark thoughts and give them form. I returned to ballet at 24, using dance as an outlet to express what I had lost while building something new. Similarly, George Michael wrote his album Older while grieving his partner and mother, pouring his sorrow into creativity and writing Jesus to a Child in a single afternoon. You do not need to be a professional artist to benefit. Drawing, journaling, or playing an instrument can help the brain process grief and shift perspective. Ultimately, healing from loss requires reestablishing a sense of safety. Grief shakes the foundation of our basic needs, leaving us feeling vulnerable and exposed. To counter this, we must tighten our circle of support, leaning on community, maintaining routines, and ensuring financial and emotional security. By creating a soft cushion of support, whether through friends, therapy, or self-care, we provide the safety the brain needs to downregulate the stress response. Over time, the brain will rewire. It will create new pathways that honor the past while accepting the present, allowing you to build a new narrative and identity that can exist and eventually thrive in the wake of what was lost. Chapter 11, Neuro Toolkit 1, How to Ditch the Negative One. The laws of neuroplasticity are governed by a simple yet profound principle. When one neuron drives the activity of another within a specific time frame, the connection between them is strengthened. In practical terms, this means that you have likely learned to associate specific thoughts with specific triggers, creating a neuronal association that spirals you into a ruminating abyss. The brain is not a moral arbiter. It does not judge whether a behavior is socially right or wrong. It simply diverts energy to the pathways that have been strengthened through repetition. However, a trigger need not be inherently negative. A trigger is essentially a cue to remind us to do something, and just as environmental cues can drive us toward the gym or toward supportive friends, they can also drive us into negativity. To understand how to dismantle these negative triggers, we must first entertain an idea about the nature of practice itself. When we break down neuroplasticity to its most basic form, the formula for lasting change is repetition plus attention plus intention. I named my dog after Kobe Bryant, one of the greatest basketball players of all time, because like the athlete, my dog loves to play ball. Bryant was an inspiration not just for his talent, but for his legendary work ethic. He was rumored to take hundreds, sometimes thousands, of shots a day. In one story, a trainer found him sweating alone on the court long before team practice began. Bryant explained he had just finished making 800 shots. He didn't just show up, he practiced with deliberate intention until his brain was wired for automaticity. Through this intense repetition, mental heuristics took over, allowing him to make complex calculations about distance, trajectory, and force at light speed, bypassing the conscious decision-making process. Contrast this with a novice like myself playing tennis. I have recently taken lessons to correct lifelong amateur mistakes, and every time the ball approaches, I panic. I have to make 100 conscious decisions before I can even attempt to hit it, often resulting in my coach yelling my name in a disappointed tone. Unlike Bryant, I have not yet built the automaticity that turns a complex motor skill into a subconscious reflex. But consider this. If Bryant became a legend by taking 800 shots a day, how expert have you become at negativity? A 2020 study suggests we have around 6,000 thoughts per day. If a significant portion of those are negative self-talk, You have been practicing negativity with the same intensity that an elite athlete practices their sport. You have solidified these patterns not because you are broken, but because your brain has strengthened the pathways you use most. Identifying the triggers that launch these negative practice sessions is the first step in regaining control. These cues typically fall into four categories. First, environmental signals drive habits. Just as stepping into a restaurant might trigger a craving for soda you wouldn't have at home, certain environments may cue your brain to spiral. Second, social situations play a massive role. We all know the difference between the friend who uplifts us and the toxic companion who triggers gossip or self-doubt. Third, sensory triggers, particularly visual ones like scrolling through Instagram, can lead to immediate negative comparisons. Finally, time-dependent cues are common, such as the specific urge to ruminate or engage in bad habits that strikes right before sleep or as the clock hits 6 p.m. These associations are strong, but because the brain is plastic, they can be dismantled. To dismantle these firing patterns, we can utilize a four-step neural toolkit. The first step is acknowledgement and understanding. When you catch yourself ruminating, realize that this is simply your brain doing what it knows best. As adults, neuroplasticity requires two things that children's brains do not: attention and intention. Attention is the spotlight we shine on the unwanted behavior, signaling to the brain's reticular activating system and salience network that this is important. Intention is the work we put in to change it. Acknowledging that you are not your thoughts, but rather the observer of a mechanism you can alter, brings a profound sense of relief. The second step is to leverage these cues to your advantage. When a negative trigger arises, interrupt the firing pattern with a new, positive habit, such as the physiological sigh. By intercepting the negative thought with a calming breathwork practice, you weaken the old neural connection and begin to associate the trigger with a regulation technique. This prevents the emotional brain from hijacking the neocortex, allowing you to move to the third step: analysis and reframing. When we are emotionally aroused, we cannot think clearly, much like refusing to go to a party because we are convinced every outfit looks terrible, only to look back at photos later and realize we looked fine. We must wait until the nervous system is regulated to reflect on our thoughts with logic. Journaling is an exceptional tool for this. It forces us to use the word-generating areas of the brain, which require more energy and structure than the free-flowing, chaotic default mode network where rumination lives. Writing externalizes the problem, making it manageable and less overwhelming. The fourth and perhaps most critical step is to stop beating yourself up. A psychiatrist at Brown University who specializes in addiction once told me that self-flagellation is the enemy of change. If beating yourself up worked, you would have been perfect years ago. Instead, it offers a false sense of control and can even activate reward centers in the brain that reinforce the negative behavior. Science shows that we learn best through positive reinforcement. Rather than berating yourself for slipping, celebrate the small wins. Acknowledge when you catch a thought, when you choose a different response, or when you show yourself compassion. Ultimately, we are entering a phase where we must shift the narrative entirely. Life is, by definition, a condition of growth and continual change. We are designed to evolve. It is estimated that 90% of the brain's operations are subconscious, driving our everyday actions and decisions without our awareness. To truly create the life we want, rather than settling for the one we have drifted into, we must dive below the surface. We must begin the deep work of rewiring the subconscious, moving from a state of reactive survival to one of intentional creation. Chapter 12. Rewire your subconscious. Most of the brain operates on a subconscious level, meaning that for the vast majority of our existence, we are functioning on autopilot without any conscious thought at all. You do not need to command your heart to beat every second, nor do you consciously instruct your body to blink or swallow. Similarly, you are likely unaware of the way you cross your legs when you are deep in thought, typing at a computer, or studying for an exam. You do not pay attention to your mannerisms because your brain has automated them to conserve energy. A perfect example of this efficiency is the process of learning to drive a car. In the beginning, you are hyper aware of every action. You constantly check your mirrors, monitor your blind spots, and overthink which pedal to press. However, once you have repeated these actions enough times to become skilled, the mechanics of driving become an automatic part of your behavior. You perform them almost subconsciously. This automation is a positive evolutionary trait because if you were required to pay strict attention to every single action you took, you would be mentally and physically exhausted by lunchtime. Nearly all your thoughts, actions, and decisions are conducted in different regions of the brain on this subconscious level. Actions and thoughts that have been repeated many times become automatic, allowing the brain to constantly make decisions for you by cross-referencing previous experiences to determine the best course of action. This is the essence of experience-dependent plasticity, the brain's ability to fine-tune its connections and functions based on how you interact with your environment. As discussed earlier, the brain creates a comprehensive database of information based on your history. You can think of your subconscious brain as a complex web of probabilities and outcomes. When you need a solution to a problem, your brain quickly scans this database and checks possible algorithms to produce a result. This same mechanism applies to your habits and behaviors, which have been pre-programmed over time. If you are someone who repeats a negative narrative to yourself, those inner beliefs will drive many of your daily actions without you even realizing it. If you have been put in a box by your family and peers, or if your confidence has been eroded by an abusive relationship, these experiences have programmed a subconscious response of shyness or worry. However, the promise of neuroplasticity is that you can break free. We can change our narratives and alter those subconscious behaviors, transforming from someone who walks into a room feeling small and anxious into someone confident and assured. To achieve this, we must reframe how we view our experiences. If the brain builds its entire database on what we go through, we should give it credit for its ability to learn from repetition. Consider the example of online dating. The first time you experience rejection or are not asked on a second date, you might feel like a rookie, unsure of how to handle the emotional blow. But by the second, third, or fourth time, you possess a database of experience. In theory, you should be better equipped to deal with it. We tend to focus on the negative, internalizing rejection as a sign that something is wrong with us. But there is a more constructive perspective. We can view these moments simply as additional pieces of information, data points on how to handle a situation. By viewing experiences as lessons rather than failures, we can build resilience and apply this logic to every other area of our lives, allowing our subconscious to learn strength rather than fear. Chapter 13. Leave your phone alone. The information we consume on a daily basis acts as a powerful unseen force, shaping our perceptions and self-image, often without our consent. While this influx comes from various media, television, magazines, news, the predominant source for most is social media. Unfortunately, these channels frequently broadcast harmful messages that establish unrealistic expectations regarding appearance and achievement. However, we possess a significant degree of agency. To some extent, we can control what we consume, choosing to focus on content that offers inspiration rather than fueling negative self-talk. This process begins with a digital spring clean. The statistics surrounding our digital habits paint a concerning picture of modern mental health. A 2018 survey by Common Sense Media revealed that 70% of teenagers felt excluded after seeing online posts of activities they were not invited to. Further studies indicate that young adults spending more than 2 hours daily on social media are twice as likely to feel socially isolated than those who spend less than 30 minutes. The correlation extends to depression, with adolescents using social media for 3 or more hours a day, reporting higher levels of depressive symptoms. The American Psychological Association found that nearly half of respondents felt anxious due to the curated lives of others online. And the National Sleep Foundation linked pre-bedtime device use to poor sleep quality for a vast majority of Americans. The evidence strongly links heavy usage to increased risks of anxiety, loneliness, self-harm, and suicidal thoughts. If you find yourself following accounts that trigger feelings of inadequacy or contribute to a narrative of lack, the most immediate and effective step is to mute or unfollow them. Any content that leads to comparison or diminishes your self-worth should be critically assessed. This is not to say all aspirational content is inherently bad. You do not need to unfollow people portraying idealized lifestyles if they do not negatively affect you. The key is to pay careful attention to the subliminal impact this consumption has on your perception of the world. It is about curation, swapping accounts that trigger negative thoughts for those that help identify triggers, and replacing those that reinforce negative beliefs with ones that reinforce positive self-belief. We must take control of what affects our mental state. Beyond curation, the timing of our digital consumption is equally critical. Specifically, we must resist the urge to use our phones first thing in the morning. During the transition from sleep to wakefulness, the brain exists in a relaxed, malleable state, gradually shifting from slower wave frequencies to higher alertness. This drowsy window offers a unique opportunity for a dreamy, meditative, and creative state of mind, opening up a world of possibility. By grabbing your phone immediately upon waking, you bypass this essential brain state, sacrificing a moment of peace for a barrage of potentially overwhelming information. Checking your phone instantly disrupts this tranquility, shifting the brain into an alert and stimulated mode prematurely. It replaces a moment ripe for mindfulness and introspection with doom scrolling and reward-seeking behavior. Engaging in this dopamine-driven loop so early sets a precedent for the rest of the day, making it harder to practice good phone hygiene later, whether at work or in conversation with friends. Furthermore, the constant stream of updates can lead to cognitive overload. If we view brain energy as mental currency, scrolling in the morning is essentially giving that wealth away before the day has even begun, risking a deficit for the tasks that truly matter. Instead of surrendering this suggestible state to the chaos of the internet, we can capitalize on it to engage in self-care, meditation, or visualization, setting a positive tone and intention that carries us through the day ahead. Chapter 14: Visualization and Attention. Having cleared the digital noise from our mornings and reclaimed that essential mental currency, we must now determine how best to invest it. This leads us directly to the practice of visualization, a potent tool for directing attention and reshaping the neural pathways that govern our potential. The efficacy of this practice is perhaps best illustrated by the career of Michael Phelps, the 28-time Olympic medalist. Beginning at the age of 11, Phelps turned to visualization not merely as a daydreaming exercise, but as a rigorous discipline. His teachers had once despaired over his inability to focus, yet under the guidance of his coach, Bob Bowman, Phelps learned to harness his mind. He did not simply visualize winning, he visualized himself as a faster, calmer swimmer in every conceivable scenario. Crucially, he mentally rehearsed things going wrong, a goggle filling with water or a suit tearing, so that he could ask himself, what if things don't go well? By simulating these stressors in the safety of his mind, he entered race day with a sense of control, having already swum the race hundreds of times before his feet ever touched the blocks. This form of mental conditioning is a common thread among the elite. Novak Djokovic, whose career represents a metamorphosis from a volatile player to a master of mental fortitude, utilizes similar techniques. Professional coaches often note that at the highest levels of sport, physical capability is largely equal. Everyone trains the same shots and puts in the same hours. The differentiator is the mental strength to push boundaries. When an athlete engages in deep visualization or self-hypnosis, the brain enters a state characterized by alpha and theta waves. In this state, the chitter-chatter of the conscious mind recedes, and the brain becomes highly receptive to learning and forming new synaptic connections. It is here, in this deep calm, that the software of the mind can be upgraded. The science supporting visualization is robust and builds upon the principles of attention and neuroplasticity established earlier. We know from the piano experiment that new neural pathways can be formed through thought alone, and from the milkshake experiment that our beliefs can alter our very physiology. Visualization works because the brain often does not distinguish between a vividly imagined event and a real one. Research shows that mental imagery stimulates the same regions of the brain as physical performance. By repeatedly rehearsing a behavior in the mind, the action becomes habituated. It is a form of mental training that strengthens the brain's ability to adopt new behaviors, effectively priming the neural architecture for success before the physical act ever occurs. However, for visualization to be transformative, it must be tethered to reality. It cannot simply be a retreat into fantasy. The mental rehearsal must parallel real-world execution. If the goal is to start a morning running habit, one cannot simply imagine the endorphin rush at the end. One must visualize the friction, the grogginess upon waking, the desire to hit snooze, and the specific physical actions of putting one foot in front of the other to get out the door. By mentally practicing the overcome of resistance, visualizing the entire sequence from getting out of bed to putting on headphones and stepping outside, the sequence of events becomes neurologically stronger, making the actual execution in the morning feel familiar and automatic. This practice requires bringing daily attention to the changes we wish to make. Otherwise, the brain will revert to its efficient, albeit often negative, mental heuristics. A morning mental training session can be used to dismantle self-limiting beliefs, such as visualizing oneself walking into a meeting with confidence or remaining calm during a difficult conversation. It is particularly useful for navigating loss or heartbreak. Instead of catastrophizing with thoughts like, "I will be alone forever," which sends the mind down a rabbit hole of low self-esteem, one can visualize navigating the urge to text an ex-partner and choosing a different, self-affirming action instead. We must be vigilant, for the stories we repeat to ourselves are powerful and prone to becoming self-fulfilling prophecies. If we carry the belief that we are destined to be hurt or cheated on into a new relationship, we unconsciously scan for evidence to support that fear, potentially pushing a partner away with unfounded accusations until the relationship collapses, confirming the bias we started with. Our beliefs, memory templates, and the reticular activating system all work in concert to shape our interaction with the world. Therefore, the first step to breaking this cycle is acknowledgement. We must bring these subconscious narratives to the surface to change them. For those who experience aphantasia, a condition where one cannot form mental images, this process is still entirely accessible. Visualization does not require cinematic clarity. It can be achieved through words, verbal descriptions, bullet points in a journal, or even speaking the narrative aloud. The mechanism remains the same, using focused attention to carve out a new path for the future. As we move deeper into the process of shifting our narrative, we begin to see that life is, by definition, a condition of growth and continual change. We are designed to evolve. By combining the removal of digital distractions with the deliberate application of visualization and attention, we stop settling for the story we were given and begin to write the one we choose. This foundational work prepares the subconscious for the next critical component of change, the power of repetition. Chapter 15, Repetition. One of the most common questions regarding self-improvement is how long it actually takes to make a lasting change. The answer, spanning anywhere from 18 to 254 days to create a new habit, can initially sound demoralizing. However, it is crucial to understand that this journey is not a temporary project or a quick fix. It is a fundamental reconstruction of the self, a long-term dismantling of the boxes peers have placed you in, the toxic traits adopted through observation, and the accumulated micro-traumas that have eroded self-esteem over years. This is not a 3-week transformation. It is the transformation that will define the rest of your life. The mechanism behind this change is rooted in the physical structure of the brain. To strengthen a neural pathway and birth a new thought or behavior, the neurons involved must communicate repeatedly within a close time frame. This repetition allows them to pair and form a bond, a process where the receiving neuron becomes increasingly efficient at processing the signal from the sender. Over time, this communication becomes seamless. Repetition is, therefore, the single most important aspect of creating new pathways for habits, behaviors, and thought patterns. Small habits eventually coalesce into big habits, paving the way for a better future until they simply become who you are. The challenge, however, lies in the brain's natural drive for efficiency. We often start a new practice with enthusiasm, but by the 5th, 6th, or 7th day, the brain grows tired of holding this new information in conscious thought. It seeks to revert to automaticity, the old, established ways of being, to save energy. This biological resistance explains why willpower alone often fails after the first week. To counter this energy-efficient drift, we must implement structural strategies that enforce repetition until the new wires fuse. To successfully implement this change, we must weave repetition into the fabric of daily life. This involves setting daily reminders and intentions to keep the conscious mind engaged. Practical methods include daily meditation immediately upon waking, surrounding oneself with like-minded individuals who reinforce the new narrative, and establishing rigid morning or evening routines. Accountability plays a vital role, whether through checking in with a friend or coach, joining support groups with shared goals, or physically slotting the new practice into a diary. Techniques like self-hypnosis and setting clear intentions further solidify the process. Ultimately, the goal is to reach a state where the new behavior is the path of least resistance, embodying the neuroscientific maxim, neurons that fire together, wire together. This focus on repetition lays the groundwork for the next critical step in rewiring the subconscious, the necessity of making space for the new version of yourself to emerge. Chapter 16. Make space. The space between the trigger and the response is where freedom lives. At first, this space feels non-existent. An impulse fires, and you react immediately, as if carried by a neurological reflex. However, with practice and observation, this pause expands. It transforms from a split-second reflex into a moment of conscious choice, an opportunity to divert the electrical signals in your brain down a new, more constructive path. This concept became vividly real to me in May 2023, shortly after I had moved to a new country. The signs were in a foreign language. I was driving on the opposite side of the road, and my brain's memory templates were failing to match the new environment. My brain was in a state of constant alertness, analyzing every decision, right down to the manual gear shifts my hand used to perform without thought. I was literally and metaphorically in overdrive, feeling the urge to react negatively to every minor inconvenience. But I knew I had to put my foot down, not on the accelerator, but on the impulse to spiral. A clear example of this occurred one day at my gym. I was standing at the reception desk, 3 minutes before a hot spin class, when I was told I could only buy water from the vending machine using coins, which I didn't have. The familiar wave of frustration began to rise, preparing to launch me into a rant about the absurdity of the situation. But instead of letting the sequence fire, I pressed pause. I held back the neurons that wanted to send me into a negativity spiral and took a moment to change gears. I smiled at the receptionist and proposed a solution. Any chance you can lend me the coins from the till and put it on my account, and I'll bring the coins in tomorrow? This pause allowed me to see the crossroads clearly. I could either be snappy with the receptionist, who wasn't at fault, or I could choose understanding and find a way forward. My motto, solutions not problems, reminds me that there is always a way through, even if that way is simply acceptance. The space between the trigger of inconveniencing news and the response of getting annoyed will widen over time until you can comfortably step in and make a conscious decision to reframe. This process is supported by experience-dependent plasticity. The brain has a remarkable ability to acknowledge errors and encode new information for future planning. Slowly, as you pay more attention to your reactions, the gap widens, giving you the room to be the person you want to be. It won't happen overnight, and self-correction often happens subconsciously at first, but with patience, observation, and tools like the physiological sigh, you will find the solution becomes more apparent with every pause you take. Chapter 17. Push through the boundaries. It is a common and frustrating phenomenon. Streetlights and flower beds. It is easy, inviting, and well-trodden. In contrast, your new habits are a dirt track at best, perhaps even just untrampled grass. You are the one who must lay the concrete blocks and plant the flowers to make this new route enticing. However, when fatigue sets in or focus drifts, the brain naturally gravitates back to the smooth, illuminated path of least resistance. Pushing through these boundaries is arguably the most critical step in achieving lasting behavioral change. There will inevitably come a moment when you want to give up and return to comfort, even if that comfort is toxic, be it a bad relationship or a pattern of self-abuse learned in childhood. The concept of pushing through boundaries is about pressing on despite this urge. It is understanding that motivation is fleeting and that you will get tired, but empowering yourself with the knowledge that it gets easier. During this phase, discipline must take the baton from motivation. Motivation starts the race, but discipline crosses the finish line. Recognizing that motivation will wane allows you to focus on consistency. Your brain consumes significant energy to implement these changes, so you may need to adjust your life to support it. This involves cutting out the non-essential to make mental space and prioritizing sleep. Sleep is the brain's greatest optimization tool. It is when new memories and learnings are consolidated. Without adequate rest, you face a double whammy. You fail to effectively store new patterns, and your tired brain is more likely to slip back into old ruts of rumination and irritability because it isn't functioning optimally. Crucially, you must understand that the brain is plastic, not elastic. Change is not linear, and a bad day does not mean you have snapped back to your original self like a rubber band. All the work you have put in remains. People often panic when they fall off the bandwagon, letting the need for perfection halt their progress entirely. But perfection is the enemy of good. The goal is not a flawless execution, but a persistent one. Even if you react immediately to a trigger on a bad day, the space between stimulus and response is still growing overall. The new programming exists within you. It doesn't simply disappear. Trust yourself in the process, knowing that every effort counts, even when you cannot immediately see the results. Chapter 18. Create a strategy and prepare for setbacks. Creating a strategy for your personal growth is not just about ambition. It is about survival on the days when motivation evaporates. When fatigue sets in and willpower wanes, a well-structured plan acts as a safety net, catching you before you freefall back into old habits. This involves leveraging a toolkit of practices: journaling, visualization, self-hypnosis, habit tracking, and guided meditation to maintain momentum. Crucially, it also means embedding these practices into a rigid routine. By clustering habits together, such as stacking a new visualization practice immediately after brushing your teeth, you capitalize on environmental and time-dependent cues that trigger automatic behavior. This consistency is vital because the brain needs repeated attention to solidify new neural pathways. Visualizing yourself remaining strong during a difficult workday or when you are exhausted is a form of mental rehearsal that primes your brain to handle adversity when it inevitably arrives. Part of this strategy is preparing specific responses for situations where you typically falter. If your default reaction to a request for your time is an automatic yes, driven by a lifetime of people-pleasing, you will likely agree before you even realize you wanted to say no. To counter this, you need to have alternate scripts ready in your back pocket. Phrases like, "I would really love to help, but I'm overwhelmed with work right now," or "My schedule is full, but perhaps we could look at a later date. By rehearsing these responses, you equip yourself with a new neural card to play in the heat of the moment, preventing the old, ingrained heuristic from taking over. However, even the best strategies cannot eliminate the reality of setbacks. Preparing for them is not pessimism, it is a necessary component of resilience. Setbacks can stem from internal states like stress and fatigue, or external factors entirely out of our control. Without preparation, we tend to attribute these failures to personal flaws, spiraling into beliefs that we are weak or have no willpower. This negative self-belief, amplified by the brain's natural negativity bias, can trigger a panic response where the brain, desperate for control, retreats to old, comfortable patterns. Recognizing that setbacks are often a result of circumstances rather than character allows us to navigate them without collapsing. We can learn a profound lesson from Michael Phelps' performance in the 2008 Olympics. During the 200-meter butterfly, his goggles filled with water, leaving him blind for the majority of the race. Instead of panicking, he remained calm because he had mentally rehearsed exactly this scenario. He knew precisely how many strokes it took to reach the wall without seeing it. He won gold and broke a world record, not just because he was fast, but because he was prepared for disaster. Studies show that preemptively shifting our perception of setbacks, viewing them as challenges to be managed rather than failures to be feared, enhances our ability to respond effectively. This proactive approach keeps the brain's executive functions online, preventing the emotional hijack that leads to rumination. Unlike rumination, which is a passive circular dwelling on negative thoughts, preparation is active and solution-oriented. It engages the logical centers of the brain to devise contingency plans. For instance, if you anticipate that a late morning with the children might make you miss your scheduled workout class, you can have a plan B, ready, a 30-minute home workout that ensures you still move your body. If you are going through a breakup, you can prepare for the inevitable pain of seeing your ex with someone new on social media by deciding in advance how you will handle it, perhaps by acknowledging the pain, using the physiological sigh, or calling a friend instead of spiraling. By distinguishing between internal causes, stress, hunger, and external causes, unrealistic expectations, toxic environments, and having a strategy for both, we maintain autonomy. Preparation grounds us in reality, minimizes anxiety, and drastically reduces the likelihood of reverting to the old patterns we have worked so hard to leave behind. Chapter 19. Step through fear and conquer self-sabotage. The brain craves control and safety, even when we associate familiarity with safety, even if that familiarity is rooted in pain. This is why individuals from abusive backgrounds often repeat patterns of abuse, or why people continually find themselves in toxic relationships. To the brain, the known hell is preferable to the unknown heaven. We operate on the subconscious principle that a known negative outcome is safer than the potential danger of an unknown one. This drive for safety manifests in myriad ways, asking friends for advice only to do the opposite, making excuses for behavior to avoid the discomfort of change, or falling into the traps of procrastination and perfectionism. We convince ourselves we cannot do something to justify remaining stuck. However, true transformation happens only in the unknown, in the uncomfortable space between decision and action. Self-sabotage is the brain's way of underestimating our capabilities, but courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to act despite it. Even icons like Novak Djokovic acknowledge fear, using it as fuel rather than a barrier. The goal is not to be fearless, but to be brave enough to create new synaptic pathways in the face of it. Stepping through fear can be approached in two distinct ways. The first is the little by little method, which I learned through my reactive rescue dog, Max. A Malinois cross German Shepherd, Max had a rough start and is genetically predisposed to nervousness, reacting to strangers with defensive aggression. Many owners would isolate such a dog, inadvertently reinforcing the belief that the world is dangerous. Instead, I chose neuroplasticity. I took Max to the beach, her favorite place, where we encountered a group of people occupying her jumping pier. Rather than fleeing, we approached. By exposing her to this discomfort in a controlled way, rewarding calm behavior and allowing her to see she was safe, She ended the day playing ball with strangers. This incremental exposure teaches the brain that the feared outcome is not inevitable, rewiring the response from panic to confidence. We can apply this to ourselves. Putting ourselves in uncomfortable situations without crossing the threshold into trauma allows us to build resilience slowly. The second approach is to jump in the deep end. This is the method of radical change. Shaving your head, moving to a new country, or quitting a job without a backup plan. I experienced this when I moved to a new city for university, only to be dumped 2 days later, leaving me alone in an unfamiliar world. My brain was forced to adapt rapidly to survive. While extreme, this method can be incredibly effective. A less dramatic example from my life was accepting a public speaking engagement for a finance company despite having little experience. I could have said no, staying safe in my comfort zone, but I said yes, relying on tools like the physiological sigh and relentless practice to get me through. The success of that talk opened doors I never would have walked through otherwise. Research shows we are wired to choose immediate rewards, safety, over uncertain future gains. However, if we consistently choose safety, we stagnate. Whether you choose to dip a toe in or dive head first, the essential action is to stop sabotaging yourself and start stepping out. By challenging yourself to see things differently, you build better connections in your brain, proving to yourself that you are capable of navigating the unknown. This book is your permission slip, your hand to hold as you make that leap. As we conclude this phase of shifting the narrative, we prepare to move into the final stage, boosting the positive. This next phase focuses on using neuroscience to build mental resilience, understanding the growth mindset, and leveraging the body, muscles, sleep, and neurochemistry to optimize our potential and fight for the life we deserve. Chapter 20. Increase mental resilience. Resilience is often misunderstood as a static trait, a genetic lottery win that some possess. Just as we have explored how to regulate the nervous system and rewire subconscious narratives, we must now turn our attention to the architecture of resilience itself. This journey begins with a fundamental reassessment of stress, moving beyond the view that it is solely a villain to understanding its role as a potential catalyst for strength. While chronic stress wreaks havoc on the body, acute stress serves a vital evolutionary purpose. It is the mechanism that sharpens our focus and primes our immune system. This creates a paradox where, contrary to popular belief, acute stress does not weaken us. It increases our capacity to cope with future challenges. The key lies in the balance between entering a sympathetic state, where adrenaline and cortisol prepare the body for fight or flight, and effectively recovering from it. This rhythm mirrors the life of an elite athlete, who must strike a precise balance between pushing their physical limits and allowing for deep recovery to avoid injury. To build mental resilience, we must learn to withstand stress and recover from it with the same intentionality. One of the most powerful tools in this endeavor is voluntary stress. By actively choosing to engage in difficult activities like high-intensity exercise, breath work, cold water exposure, or saunas, we can hack our own biology. Research led by Dr. Alia Krum demonstrates that our mindset towards this stress fundamentally alters how our bodies react to it. In one study, participants were divided into two groups. One was told that stress is debilitating and hinders performance, while the other was told that stress fuels the brain with oxygen and enhances focus. The results were staggering. The group primed to view stress as enhancing not only improved their performance, but also exhibited a more efficient physiological response. Their blood vessels did not constrict in fear. Instead, their heart efficiency improved, pumping blood with less effort. Reappraising stress shifts it from a threat to a tool, changing the biological reality of the experience. This biological mastery extends to how we handle the neurochemistry of pressure. In a typical stressful situation, the body releases adrenaline while the brain releases noradrenaline, creating a synchronized state of panic and arousal. However, studies on individuals trained in methods like cold water exposure and specific breathing techniques, similar to those popularized by Wim Hof, reveal a fascination decoupling of these chemicals. Under voluntary stress, these individuals could maintain high levels of bodily adrenaline while keeping brain noradrenaline low. In layman's terms, Their bodies were energized and ready for a fight, but their minds remained calm and clear. This is the state of the boxer in the ring: physically explosive, mentally still. This ability to stay calm while the body is agitated is known as top-down regulation. It is the prefrontal cortex, the center of logic and reason, modulating the primal fear signals of the amygdala. While the brain is designed to override logic during unexpected threats to ensure survival, voluntary stress allows us to train this top-down control in a safe environment. The first time you go for a run, you may feel anxiety and physical distress. Over time, however, while the physical exertion, adrenaline, remains, the mental panic, noradrenaline, subsides. The link between physical arousal and mental distress weakens. This training transfers to real life. When a boss yells or a crisis emerges, the resilient individual can observe the bodily sensation of stress without succumbing to the mental narrative of panic. Mindfulness meditation acts as another pillar of this top-down regulation. It is not merely a spiritual practice, but a cognitive workout that strengthens the prefrontal cortex, improving attention control and emotional regulation. Regular practice has been shown to accelerate the drop in stress hormones and inflammatory molecules following a stressful event, allowing the system to return to baseline much faster. However, resilience is not built in isolation. It is a complex trait influenced by genetics, environment, and crucially, social connection. There is profound truth in the sentiment that love invents us. Psychological resilience is inextricably linked to our environment and support networks. For years, self-help rhetoric has insisted that we cannot be loved until we love ourselves, but neurobiology suggests otherwise. Brain maps responsible for emotional regulation and self-worth are formed through somatosensory input, through the way we are treated, touched, and spoken to by others. Dr. Bruce Perry, a child psychiatrist known for his work with trauma, concluded that the single greatest predictor of a child thriving after neglect was the presence of a support system. We need connection to feel safe. Whether through family, friends, support groups, or therapy, we must build a soft cushion of support. For introverts or neurodivergent individuals, this does not require a vast social network. Research shows that the quality of connection far outweighs the quantity. Just a few meaningful bonds can provide the emotional buffer necessary to weather adversity. Ultimately, resilience is the product of experience-dependent plasticity. Our brains are designed to learn from failure, adding each setback to a database of experiences that informs future responses. Failure is not a deterrent, but a necessity for growth, teaching the brain about the world and its own capabilities. By deliberately choosing stress, reframing our mindset, and leaning into connection, we teach the brain that it can bounce back. We move from a fixed mindset that avoids challenge to a growth mindset that embraces it, understanding that effort is the path to mastery and that the capacity for recovery lies within our own neurobiology. Chapter 21, Growth Mindset, the foundation of resilience. We must now turn our attention to the framework through which we view our own potential. It is one thing to withstand stress. It is another to actively use it as a mechanism for expansion. This brings us to the concept of the growth mindset, a term popularized by Dr. Carol Dweck, which posits that our most basic abilities are not static endowments, but qualities that can be developed through dedication and hard work. Brains and talent are merely the starting point. This perspective creates a resilience that is essential for great accomplishment, shifting the internal narrative from a fear of judgment to a love of learning. To understand the trap of a fixed mindset, consider the story of Martha, the sister of my friend Samantha. Martha was the quintessential high achiever, top of her class, constantly praised for her high IQ, and a graduate of a prestigious Master of Fine Arts program. Yet upon entering the workforce at a major digital marketing firm, she crumbled. Despite her obvious intelligence, she found herself deeply insecure and unable to cope with the demands of adult life. The issue was not a lack of capability, but a rigidity of belief. Martha operated under a fixed mindset. She had internalized the praise of her youth to mean that her intelligence was a fixed trait. Consequently, every challenge at work felt like a test she might fail, and every potential failure felt like an indictment of her character. She avoided problem solving to protect her image, terrified that a mistake would expose her as a fraud. Martha's experience is supported by Dr. Dweck's extensive research into motivation. In a landmark experiment, teachers gave students feedback that linked their performance either to their intelligence, "You're so smart," or their effort, "You must have worked hard." The differences in the subsequent behavior of these children were stark. The students praised for their intelligence began to favor less challenging tasks, opting to protect their label of smart rather than risk failure. Some even lied about their scores to maintain the illusion of perfection. Conversely, the children praised for their effort, sought out harder problems that promised increased learning. They were unconcerned with how they compared to others and focused entirely on the strategy of solving the problem. This illustrates a profound truth. When we attach our identity to the outcome of an action, we attribute our performance to who we are as a person. We avoid challenges to avoid invalidating our own self-worth. However, the neurobiology of a growth mindset reveals that the brain is far more adaptable than Martha believed. The first major underpinning of this mindset is the understanding that learning is a dynamic process. When we accept that the brain is malleable, neuroplastic, we are more willing to adapt to circumstances. This persistence enhances the neural pathways associated with learning. Neurologically, those with a growth mindset show different brain circuitry patterns. They are more receptive to correction and better able to neutralize negative feedback. This mindset is associated with increased activity in the striatum and basal ganglia, key areas responsible for reward-related learning. When children underwent growth mindset training, activity in these areas increased while they engaged in difficult math problems. They performed with higher accuracy after making mistakes because they were able to process the error, make sense of it, and self-correct, rather than shutting down in shame. The second neurobiological pillar of this mindset is the detachment of identity from outcome. Just as Novak Djokovic maintains that he has no regrets even when he loses, adopting a growth mindset allows us to fail without feeling like a failure. When we stop viewing our capabilities as fixed, we stop trying to prove ourselves right and start trying to improve. This shift changes the brain's reward system. The regions associated with effort and persistence become more active, and the exertion of effort itself becomes a rewarding task. Simultaneously, the regions associated with fear and anxiety reduce their activity in the face of setbacks. We move from a state of threat to a state of engagement. If you recognize yourself in Martha, if you have labeled yourself as not good enough or avoided challenges to stay safe, remember that these beliefs are not permanent. You can rewire your behavior to be more open to failure. This involves breaking down the idea that your challenges dictate who you are. It is a shift from living in a loop of confirmation bias, where you constantly look for evidence of your inadequacy, to a state where you seek opportunities for mastery. Ultimately, this transformation often occurs in the uncomfortable, claustrophobic cracks between deciding to change and actually seeing results. As my best friend often reminds me, the magic happens in the darkness. Every time you feel buried, you must realize you have actually been planted. When life rips you out of the ground again, it is not a punishment, it is a harvest. Life will inevitably knock you around, but these downfalls are learning opportunities, not a verdict on your soul. You cannot choose what life serves you, but you can choose not to live offended by it. By fighting for your narrative and maintaining your place in the driver's seat, you harness the incredible potential for growth that lies within the human brain. As we continue to explore how to boost the positive and optimize our biology, we must look beyond the mind and consider the body. Just as our thoughts shape our brain, our physical movement plays a crucial role in our mental state. This leads us to the fascinating connection between our physical activity and our neurological health, the muscle-brain axis. Chapter 22. Your muscles communicate directly with your brain. One of the most pervasive and damaging misconceptions in modern society is the framing of exercise as a transactional punishment, a penance paid for eating a heavy meal, or a grim necessity solely for weight loss. This narrative, fueled by diet culture and unrealistic media standards, has stripped physical movement of its true power, leaving many afraid of it or viewing it as a chore. However, if we shift our perspective from the mirror to the microscope, we discover that exercise is arguably the most potent tool available for cognitive health. The science reveals a profound biological reality. Your muscles have a direct line of communication with your brain. By understanding the neurophysiology behind movement, we can strip away the shame and confusion, empowering ourselves to move not for how we look, but for how we think and feel. To understand this impact, we must look at the physical structure of the brain itself, specifically gray matter. This tissue, composed of neuronal cell bodies and synapses, is the seat of processing, cognition, and memory. Neurodegenerative conditions like Alzheimer's involve the progressive loss of this tissue. Research indicates that regular physical activity does not merely maintain gray matter, it actively increases its volume, particularly in the hippocampus, the center of memory and learning, and the prefrontal cortex, the CEO of the brain responsible for decision making. By engaging in aerobic fitness, we are essentially physically expanding the hardware required for cognitive control, a benefit that extends from adolescence well into late adulthood. This protective mechanism becomes even more critical when we consider the effects of stress and inflammation. While acute inflammation is a necessary healing response, chronic stress keeps the body in a state of perpetual emergency, leading to systemic inflammation that can cross the blood-brain barrier. This biological state is where the chemistry of mood takes a dark turn. Under normal circumstances, an amino acid called tryptophan, found in foods like turkey and nuts, is converted into serotonin, the neurotransmitter that regulates mood and sleep. However, when the body is inflamed by stress, this pathway is hijacked. Instead of becoming serotonin, tryptophan is diverted to create a molecule called kynurenine, which can further metabolize into neurotoxic compounds that drive anxiety and depression. Essentially, stress steals the building blocks of your happiness and turns them into neurotoxins. This is where the muscle-brain axis intervenes. When you exercise, the mechanical action of your muscles, contracting and relaxing, releases specific enzymes. These enzymes intercept kynurenine in the bloodstream and break it down before it can cross into the brain and cause harm. In this way, your muscles act as a filtration system, protecting your neural environment. Furthermore, this muscle contraction releases myokines, muscle-based proteins that travel to the brain to improve mood, reduce anxiety, and protect synaptic integrity. This axis creates a biological feedback loop where physical strength directly translates to mental resilience. Among the most vital molecules released during this process is brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF. Often described as fertilizer for the brain, BDNF supports the survival of existing neurons and encourages the growth of new ones, a process essential for neuroplasticity. Low levels of BDNF are strongly linked to depression as the brain loses its plasticity and becomes rigid in negative patterns. Exercise floods the brain with this protein, restoring adaptability. Simultaneously, specific types of movement, particularly resistance training, stimulate the release of insulin-like growth factor 1, IGF-1. While known for its role in physical growth, in the brain, IGF-1 aids in fear extinction, the process of weakening the synaptic connections that hold onto fear memories. By lifting weights and progressively overloading the muscles, we are chemically priming the brain to let go of old fears and anxieties. The benefits of movement also extend to how we process trauma and emotional distress. Walking, running, or cycling generates forward motion, which naturally causes the eyes to scan side to side. This lateral eye movement engages the frontoparietal network of the brain, which is involved in problem solving and attention. Crucially, this network competes for resources with the amygdala, the brain's fear center. This mechanism explains why a long walk often provides clarity on difficult problems. The physical act of moving forward quiets the emotional brain and brings the logical brain online, allowing for subconscious problem solving without the paralyzing grip of anxiety. Beyond the brain's architecture, exercise revitalizes the body's energy systems by increasing mitochondrial density. These powerhouses of the cells produce ATP, the fundamental energy currency of life. Improved mitochondrial function not only leads to greater physical energy, but is also linked to better mood regulation and reduced oxidative stress. When combined with the release of endorphins, the body's natural painkillers, and endocannabinoids, exercise creates a powerful biochemical cocktail that reduces pain and induces feelings of well-being. To harness these benefits, one does not need to become an elite athlete. The goal is a balanced weekly regime that incorporates different types of movement. Zone 2 cardio, moderate activity where you can still hold a conversation, is highly effective for blood flow and oxygenation. This can be as simple as a brisk walk or a steady cycle. Interspersing this with short bursts of high-intensity effort and regular resistance training ensures the release of the full spectrum of protective myokines and hormones. Even neuromotor training, such as balance and coordination exercises, plays a role in staving off cognitive decline. By viewing exercise through this neuroscientific lens, it ceases to be a chore and becomes a vital maintenance protocol for the hardware of your mind, ensuring that the software upgrades of your new narrative have a healthy, resilient place to take root. Chapter 23. Sleep is your #1 optimization tool. The suggestion that sleep is the solution to our problems often elicits a predictable response, an eye roll. I recently experienced this firsthand during a chat with a friend's father, Michael. When I suggested that the remedy for his stress and weight gain was simply to sleep more, he giggled and dismissed the idea, convinced that a lack of sleep has no bearing on one's waistline. But the physiological reality is that it absolutely does. When we lack an understanding of what occurs under the hood of our biology, it is difficult to connect the dots between a restless night and downstream effects like weight gain, weakened immunity, and overall health. I'm reminded of the film The Intern, where Anne Hathaway's character, a CEO under immense pressure, is told by her mother that women sleeping less than 7 hours a night are 38% more likely to experience major weight gain. While that specific film moment might feel like diet culture clickbait, the underlying science holds water. There is a definitive link between sleep deprivation and metabolic dysregulation, a realization that clicked for me when I delved into the work of Matthew Walker and his exploration of why we sleep. However, the importance of sleep extends far beyond weight management. It is arguably the most critical component in the process of neuroplasticity and habit formation. In the earlier phases of our journey, we discussed how the brain's ability to make plastic changes is compromised when it enters low power mode due to stress. Sleep deprivation forces the brain into this exact state. When we are awake, we are actively acquiring new information, but these fresh memories are fragile and susceptible to decay. It is only during sleep that the brain stabilizes these memories, forming new synaptic connections that consolidate what we have learned. Without this nocturnal solidification, the work of rewiring our narratives becomes infinitely harder. If you have ever experienced the brain fog that follows a poor night's rest, you know that the machinery is not functioning correctly. If the brain is the hardware and our mental health is the software, it is nearly impossible to run a successful update on a system that is crashing. To truly appreciate this, we must break down the architecture of the night. As we sleep, we cycle through two primary phases, non-REM and REM, rapid eye movement, with each cycle lasting approximately 90 minutes. Early in the night, we descend into deep sleep, the slowest wave stage that is most restorative for the body. This phase allows for physical repair and is critical for the lymphatic system, a waste clearance mechanism that washes away toxic metabolites from the central nervous system. When this cleaning process is inhibited by a lack of deep sleep, it can lead to neuronal loss, inflammation, and an increased risk of neurodegenerative diseases. Furthermore, deep sleep is the prime window for the release of growth hormone. Often associated only with athletes or growing children, growth hormone is vital for everyone. It regulates metabolism, repairs brain cells, improves alertness, and stabilizes mood. It is a restorative force that heals the damage caused by chronic stress. As the night progresses, the cycles shift to favor REM sleep, a state where the brain is highly active and dreaming occurs. This stage is the domain of emotional regulation. Studies indicate that REM sleep acts as a form of nocturnal therapy, helping to strip the painful emotional charge from our memories. During this phase, levels of norepinephrine, a neurochemical associated with alertness and stress, plummet to their lowest point. This unique chemical environment allows the brain to reprocess traumatic experiences and intrusive thoughts in a safe, low-stress setting, effectively integrating them so they no longer trigger a reactive emotional response. This mechanism is so powerful that therapeutic techniques like EMDR, eye movement desensitization, and reprocessing were developed to mimic the eye movements of REM sleep to help patients process trauma. REM sleep is also inextricably linked to our hormonal health, specifically testosterone. While often discussed in the context of men, testosterone is a vital hormone for women as well, influencing cognitive function, muscle growth, and bone density. The majority of testosterone release occurs during REM sleep. Research has shown that sleeping just 5 hours a night for a week can drop a man's testosterone levels by 10 to 15%. A staggering decline when you consider that normal aging only decreases it by about 1 to 2% per year. Because testosterone modulates synaptic plasticity and aids in memory retention, forfeiting sleep means forfeiting the very chemical support needed to make new habits stick. The consequences of neglecting sleep reach down to our very genetic code. Sleep maintains the immune system, allowing it to eliminate damaged cells and pathogens. When this process is interrupted, the fallout is severe. Studies reveal that individuals sleeping 6 hours or less for just 1 week experience negative alterations in approximately 3% of their genes, half of which downregulated the immune system and increased inflammation, while the other half increased markers associated with tumor growth. This biological reality underscores that sleep is not a luxury. It is the foundation of our physiological and psychological integrity. Optimizing sleep requires a strategy that honors these biological rhythms. It begins with temperature regulation. A hot shower before bed can help lower the body's internal temperature, signaling that it is time to rest. We must also protect our melatonin production by avoiding screens and bright lights at least an hour before sleep, and cutting off caffeine 8 hours prior to ensure the brain can wind down. Creating a sanctuary of darkness with blackout curtains or an eye mask, and perhaps supplementing with magnesium L-threonate can further support the transition into deep rest. Crucially, the morning is just as important as the evening. Getting sunlight in your eyes first thing helps set the circadian rhythm for the following night. Ultimately, prioritizing sleep is an act of protecting your future self. It is the tool that ensures the emotional work you are doing is processed, the new habits you are building are consolidated, and the physical body you inhabit is repaired. As we move forward to explore the role of dopamine, we must remember that the chase for the next thing can be exhausting, but a well-rested brain is the only vessel capable of finding happiness in the now. Chapter 24. Dopamine. Your happiness is by dopamine, a neurotransmitter often mislabeled as the chemical of pleasure. In reality, dopamine is the chemical of motivation. It drives the pursuit of pleasure, but does not provide the feeling of satisfaction itself. Studies show that dopamine levels actually drop once a goal is achieved, because its biological purpose is to anticipate a reward and propel you toward it. Once the chase is over, the brain must reset the system for future pursuits, leaving many feeling underwhelmed or empty after a major win. True pleasure and satisfaction come from a different cocktail of neurotransmitters, serotonin, oxytocin, and endorphins, which are the chemicals of the here and now. These allow us to feel contentment in the present moment. However, dopamine is powerful and can easily overrun these quieter signals if we do not actively foster gratitude and presence. If we rely solely on goals for happiness, we risk living on a hamster wheel, constantly chasing a future that never arrives, while ignoring the joy available in the journey itself. The real race is not against others, but against oneself, and the focus must shift from the destination to the personal growth and lessons learned along the way. A significant barrier to this shift is the culture of instant gratification. We live in a world designed to provide quick, effortless dopamine hits through social media, processed food, and impulse shopping. While these activities are not inherently bad in moderation, excessive reliance on them disrupts the brain's reward system. When we constantly spike our dopamine without effort, we raise our baseline, meaning we need increasingly larger hits just to feel normal. This desensitization lowers our motivation for tasks that require sustained effort, such as long-term career goals or maintaining physical health. It creates a catch-22. The easy dopamine lulls us into a false sense of satisfaction, but its volatility sends us crashing down, leaving us less motivated than before. To counter this, we must adhere to a fundamental rule for dopamine regulation. Effort must precede reward. Whether it is exercise, cooking a meal, or completing focused work, attaching effort to our pleasure stabilizes our neurochemistry. Cold water exposure is a prime example. Studies show that submerging the body in cold water can increase dopamine by 250%, a sustained rise that avoids the sharp crash associated with cheap thrills. Similarly, breaking the habit of scrolling requires viewing the brain as a muscle to be trained. By time-blocking focused work, putting phones in another room, or even using app-blocking tools, we can retrain our attention span. Crucially, we must relearn the art of boredom. As Dr. Anna Lemke explains in Dopamine Nation, pain and pleasure are balanced on a seesaw. When we overindulge in pleasure, the brain counterbalances with pain, often felt as a craving for more. Constant stimulation keeps this seesaw swinging wildly. Boredom is the reset button. Sitting with the discomfort of doing nothing allows the reward circuitry to stabilize and opens the door to creativity and mind wandering. It is in these quiet moments, free from the constant noise of consumption, that we reconnect with ourselves. By prioritizing effortful rewards and embracing the present, we stop chasing happiness and start living it. Chapter 25. Build self-trust and confidence. You know that friend who constantly calls for advice, asking 10 other people the same question, only to ignore everyone and remain stuck in indecision? I used to be that friend. The internal argument, knowing the solution but lacking the conviction to trust it, is a universal struggle. This doubt often stems from past negative experiences, fear of rejection, or simply overthinking. But the antidote lies in building self-trust. Self-trust is the practice of having confidence in your abilities, maintaining personal accountability, and crucially, keeping the promises you make to yourself. When you trust your own judgment, you create a stable foundation for mental well-being and success. This became vividly clear to me when I received an email from one of the world's biggest publishing houses. My heart nearly exploded with joy. Not just because of the opportunity, but because I was ready for it. Had it come a year earlier, panic might have paralyzed me. But because I had spent years transforming my mindset, I approached the proposal with a calm excitement, letting my gut guide the writing. The result was work I was genuinely proud of, unmarred by fear of the outcome. I knew that even if this deal fell through, I would learn and try again. This resilience was born from self-trust, built through consistent personal accountability. If I promised myself I would wake up at 6 a.m. to run, I did it. Keeping these small promises is vital. Every broken promise to yourself undermines your confidence, while every kept one reinforces your capacity to rely on the only person you can truly control, yourself. Building this trust involves practical steps, honoring commitments, setting realistic goals that align with your values, and celebrating even minor accomplishments to shift your brain's negativity bias. It also requires a growth mindset, viewing failure as a learning opportunity rather than a character flaw. Perhaps most importantly, it involves listening to your intuition. Your gut feeling is not magic. It is your subconscious mind processing vast amounts of data without your conscious awareness. Studies show we can make accurate decisions without thinking about them because our subconscious is constantly cross-referencing past experiences. When you feel a red flag in a relationship, it is your brain recognizing a pattern you have seen before. Trusting this signal reinforces the reciprocal relationship between you and your intuition. The more you listen, the clearer the signal becomes. However, the journey to self-trust is not linear. There will be days when you slip up, when the brain's desire for energy-efficient automaticity pulls you back into old habits. If you break a promise to yourself, do not beat yourself up. Acknowledge the slip, understand that change is uncomfortable, and get back on track. To aid this, you can use visualization to rehearse new behaviors, like waking up without grabbing your phone, or change your environment to remove triggers. Establishing non-negotiables, daily practices like exercise, sleep hygiene, or meditation that you perform regardless of motivation, is essential. Motivation is fleeting. Discipline is the engine of lasting change. By sticking to these non-negotiables, you prove to yourself daily that you are trustworthy, building a reservoir of confidence that allows you to navigate life with your head and heart in alignment. This internal harmony is the ultimate goal, enabling you to face the world with the assurance that, no matter what happens, you have your own back. Chapter 26. Outro. Since holding that first brain in my hands, or if they possess the tools to break free from the prison of ruminating thoughts. However, what I do know with absolute certainty is that we are all granted a unique set of gifts in this lifetime. The traits and qualities specific to you are dictated by the idiosyncratic genes coded into your DNA, creating brain maps of an internal world that can never be replicated by anyone else. No matter how hard we strive to blend in with the crowd, our biology demands individuality. It is our duty to exhume these buried traits and share them with the world. Declaring your true nature is not a selfish act to shy away from. It is a reclamation of your story, a better story that is your right to tell. We know now that the brain can change, and therefore we can change. We possess the power to be whoever we want to be, creating ourselves from scratch by reprogramming our minds to live fulfilling lives unencumbered by the chains of negative thought loops and hindering habits. Our genetics confirm that we arrive with a distinct potential, and it is only the weight of life, expectations, conditioning, and societal pressure that convinces us we are incapable, not good enough, or that we have somehow left it too late. You must find those inherent qualities and amplify them into greatness. True greatness is not merely finding your own light, but influencing those around you to find theirs. It is learning who you are and passing that knowledge to the next person, asking for nothing in return but the infiltration of positive energy through guidance and action. Remember, love invents us. So to return to the question that lingers over our existence, is it by mistake or by design? It is both. Chapter 27. Commitment. By virtue of the associations between the anything, this is the moment to create yourself, to fully commit to your own potential, and to metaphorically shake hands with yourself on that promise. You must set yourself free from the lingering sensation that you are stuck. You have likely spent a long time running in fear, but it is essential to realize that fear is not your enemy. Rather, fear is your reason to act. When you accept fear, you learn that the monster was never as scary as the shadow it cast. The world will commend your courage, not because you are fearless, but because courage is the triumph over fear. It is the act of acknowledging the trepidation, yet choosing to move forward with purpose and conviction. You must hurl yourself into the darkness with courage, for it is only there that you will come to learn that you are the light that allows you to see. This light is joyful, capable of illuminating a life free from the whispers of negative self-beliefs that insist you are not good enough. Throw yourself into the unknown and discover that every bit of knowledge you need is already at your fingertips. The obstacle you were afraid to climb is in fact the very first step that takes you over the line. It is time to give yourself and your brain more credit, because ultimately the only thing stopping you right now is you. Everything you have been through up to this point has prepared you for this moment. And when things start falling apart again, because life dictates that they will, remember that you are now equipped to deal with the adversities thrown your way. You must face your fears and push through the unknown, for you never know what lies on the other side. Perhaps it is failure, perhaps it is not. But you must come to believe that there is no such thing as failure. Not really. It is all a learning experience. So fail away, knowing that the only race that matters is the one against yourself. Do not succumb to comparison, gossip, or the numbing cycle of doom scrolling. Live your life. Prove them wrong. This final call to action serves as the culmination of the journey through neuroplasticity, bridging the gap between biological mechanics and human agency. It shifts the focus from the technical how of rewiring the brain to the why, empowering the reader to take the tools of resilience, habit formation, and self-trust and apply them to the art of living. It marks the transition from understanding the brain's potential to actively using it to craft a life of purpose, signaling that the work of becoming is never truly finished, but always within one's control. Chapter 28, Forgiveness and Power. You always hold the power to change your destiny, to alter the pre-programmed course of your life into something dictated by Yang's one final and arguably the hardest step on this journey of change: forgiveness. Redeeming ourselves of the self-limiting beliefs instilled during our formative years requires us to extend forgiveness to those who unknowingly or unintentionally programmed us. This process begins by empathizing with their intentions and circumstances, understanding that they may have been operating within the confines of their own limited knowledge and experiences. By shifting the focus from blame to self-responsibility, we recognize the fallibility of the individuals who influenced us, people often driven by their own fears and limitations. Acknowledging the power of their influence while simultaneously recognizing our ability to reprogram ourselves allows us to release the grip of resentment, creating the necessary room for personal growth and healing. Forgiveness grants us the peace and freedom needed to pursue our potential, unburdened by the weight of past beliefs, empowering us to shape a brighter future. For without it, we run the risk of becoming the very people who hurt us. As you reach the end of this guide, let it serve as the light you needed at the end of the tunnel, understanding that everything required to make a change is no longer just within these pages, but within you. Do not fight against time, for good things take time, and you are the greatest project you will ever work on. With the tools to change your life now in hand, you can close this chapter, look up to the sky, and realize there is a vast world out there where you can be whoever you want to be with your new narrative. You have the agency to create yourself. Reflecting on this journey, I am reminded of the profound questions that have arisen since I first held a human brain in my hands. There are some answers I will never have, such as whether that specific brain I held was happy or if it knew how to break free from ruminating thoughts. However, what I do know with certainty is that we are given a unique set of gifts in this lifetime. The traits and qualities that are unique to you have been dictated by the idiosyncratic genes coded into your DNA, creating brain maps of an internal world that no one will ever be able to replicate, no matter how much we try to blend in with others. It is our duty to use these gifts, to exhume these buried traits and share them with the world. Declaring your true nature to the world is not a selfish act to shy away from. It is your right to tell a better story about yourself. We know now that the brain can change, which means we can change. We can be whoever we want to be, creating ourselves from scratch and reprogramming our minds to live a fulfilling life free from the chains of negative thought loops and hindering habits. While life, expectations, conditioning, and societal pressure may tell us we are not capable or good enough, our biology tells a different story. We must find our unique qualities and amplify them into greatness. Greatness is not just finding your own path, but influencing those around you to find theirs. It is learning who you are and passing that knowledge on to the next person, infiltrating others with your energy through guidance and action. Love invents us, and when we ask whether our existence is by mistake or design, the answer is undoubtedly both. This final movement of the book serves as both a release and a commencement, shifting the focus from the internal mechanics of neuroplasticity to the external application of a reimagined life. It bridges the gap between the scientific understanding of brain function and the emotional necessity of forgiveness, ultimately positioning the reader not just as a passive recipient of genetic coding, but as the active architect of their own destiny.